Thanks. Thank you, Inese. Good morning, colleagues. Continuing our, let's say, first part of our session, which is more of theoretical, insights in the issues we are covering before we getting more directly into Kabada tool issues. So I'm honored and glad to present the research done by me, myself, and Professor Inese Mavļutova called Digitalization in Entrepreneurship Education in Search of a New Approach. So we know that we are not only searching for a new approach, we are actually producing and getting closer to the end by every day, and it's called Kabada. But of course, in the pace of getting there, we also have to have some theoretical research to do and to see what are the general trends in education, and in particular in entrepreneurship education in relation to digitalization processes that are rolling on every day. And we did it. Of course, that kind of research is topical, and we know that in particular higher education institutions are actually transforming their strategies in order to meet different new requests and expectations of students and other stakeholders heavily related to the digitalization processes. There is substantial also pressure from education policy institutions in all over the Europe, starting from European Commission and also national governments. So, and of course, also the process of pandemic has inspired many institutions to apply more and more different approaches and ways how to use the digitalization-based solutions in the education process. So that's why we consider it to be topical, not only for our needs, for those who build Kabada, but also in general. So the aim of our research was to explore. I have to say that this is mostly theoretical research. What we did, we went through and analyzed tens of articles from scientific literature on digitalization trends and challenges in education, mostly, of course, focusing on entrepreneurship education. The objectives actually were to analyze more in-depth some specific determinants of the adoption of digitalization in entrepreneurship education. Actually, we found 5 blocks to research. There is culture of education institutions, competences of teachers and students, and industry expectations, competition in education, and cost savings, and maybe some other benefits from adoption of digitalization in entrepreneurship education process. So, as I said, the research is really theoretical and mostly based on literature analysis, existing analysis of existing research papers and reports on digitalization. Well, I will refer also to maybe some quantitative research we did already a couple of years ago. This is what our research is based on. Of course, it will be possible just to show the very general outcomes that we arrived to. As the topic is very broad, and the scope of the literature we looked at is very high, broad spectrum, a lot of material. So, before I start looking at the literature review outcomes, I want to say that this survey we did 3 years ago. We all know the results, but just to remind you that also us, when we proceeded through this quantitative research, we found out that there is still not very high, let me say, intention of developing and managing of their own business among young people, in particular students, and especially when we know that most of the students we researched were business and management and economics profile students, which somehow implies that we could have seen maybe a little bit more answers that would show the positive business intentions or entrepreneurial intentions. Yes. So, and yeah, we had already then some conclusions we draw from this research. First of all, that there is still quite low entrepreneurial spirits all over the world. While at the same time we found also that in EU countries, some of EU countries at least, students have quite high entrepreneurial intentions, and when researching what they are looking for, what assistance, and how they like to see entrepreneurship education. So we found a lot of answers, positive answers in respect to the use of digital techniques and in this process. So that was why we thought that more in-depth studies are needed, and we made a quite significant dive into the ocean of scientific literature, looking in five dimensions: culture of education institutions. Okay, I mentioned that those five, and here you can see that a lot of authors have looked at this and wrote about that and made some researches. So, and I want to share the outcomes for each of those five blocks with you from the literature review. First of all, about the culture of education institutions, which is actually the basis or background for things to happen in this area. And of course, well, whichever author we looked or article we looked at, we of course found the strong arguments favoring that and then saying that, of course, the school cultures, organizational cultures matter a lot and in particular that coming from the top management and leaders of the organizations in transforming the organizations more to digitalization and then the use of different digital tools and etc. in the process of education. So this is the backbone actually nowadays and in general for things to happen, that this has to be built in the organizational culture of the education institutions. Another aspect we were looking at is that of competences of teachers and students. Of course, we speak here about the digital proficiency, about the digital competences. Otherwise, of course, we cannot speak about the digital transformation and the use of digital tools, etc. in the education if there is a lack of competences for teachers and students in this area. And what we found was quite interesting aspect because, well, let me say that some kind of common wisdom goes that, okay, well, teachers maybe because they are older, typically lack these competences, while students are very advanced in this. But when studying literature, it turns out that not always it is true. And in particular, we found quite a lot of conclusions and assertions that actually, even though it might be expected that digital competences of students, in particular, as for 21st century citizens, should have been quite high. It's not always the case. And in particular, there is a quite big variation or let's say dispersion of when we look at the level of digital competences, which is one of the problems that has to be taken into account when thinking about arrival of digitalization in entrepreneurial education. Industry expectations is very important, and again, some kind of paradoxes come out. We all have witnessed that there is a quite high pressure from education policy institutions saying that the industry needs people, employees with high digital competences, and so you have to emphasize more and more acquisition of these skills, while some of the authors have made in-depth research say that actually the corporate world is quite lagging behind sometimes in respect to responsiveness to changes, and in particular also to the digitalization. So, which is a little bit strange, but that is what we found when reading and analyzing different papers. Competition in education is a very important aspect that is already now and for sure also in the future will facilitate digitalization processes. So we will see also from the cost perspective, but not only, it's also the source of competitive advantage, especially as seen by students very often. So this is what authors that we studied also emphasize, saying that this advancements in ICT in particular is one of the really potential competitive advantage sources for the education institutions. And finally, the fifth dimension is about the cost savings and maybe some other benefits from adoption of digitalization. And obviously, all the authors we were looking at emphasize that there is a huge potential for cost reduction applying digitalization methods and tools in the education process, and in particular in the education sector it is important because when you compare the trends of general inflation in the economy, so the inflation in education sector is always higher as it is labor intensive, and the labor costs are growing quite fast. In particular, we can refer to Eastern European countries like Latvia, for example. So cost savings, but not only. This is also about some other qualitative benefits. In particular, studies show that through the use of digital solutions in the course of education, student engagement levels are increasing, yes, and this significantly enhances the student learning process, which is very important. So this is what we found from studying the literature, and of course, as title goes, in the search of new approach or new approaches, and we, as we know, together in our team have already found the new approach, and everything started with a conceptual framework. We already published the article about that a couple of years ago, speaking about this conceptual framework of digital automatic software usage. I will not go into details. This is maybe even more for our partners on the IT side. But as a result, we arrived to a new approach called Kabada tool. And here again, even though we now discuss a lot, I know that in about 20 or so minutes, our project leader, Jānis, will speak about that in details. So I will leave it to him, but at least we know that we all, actually, our team, Kabada team, we have found one new approach, and then we hope that this will be a real success story. Yeah. So conclusions. As I said, our previous survey results already proved that students in EU countries have high entrepreneurial intentions, despite the general decrease in entrepreneurial perceptions, maybe globally, yes, globally, but in European countries we see some growth from different researchers and also from ours, and that these students are looking for the use of distance learning methods and the use of digital solutions in that process. Now, we see that culture of educational organizations influence technology integration through technology leadership and support services. And a very big important role here is for the top management and the leadership of the organization. So they are those who are mostly settling down or creating the organizational culture. So digital competences of both teachers and students are of high importance if we dream about use of digital solutions, tools, and approaches in the education process. But still, there are some problems, in particular, in the very different level of digital skills among both students and also teachers. Industry expectations are of decrease, as I said, and sometimes we see that this is even not always, this industry demand is not always open and highly intended towards attraction of digital skills in reality, as proven by some researchers. Competitive advantage of education institutions, among many other factors, applies to its potential to keep up with advancements of in ICT. That's obvious, and of course, also the aspect of cost reduction is very important, as we see it from different researches made. Yeah, so. And there are also some other benefits, not only those related to cost saving, but also some qualitative improvements in the process, and also the perception of students on how they want to learn. And digitalization here can bring a lot of help. So that's it. Thank you very much. There are a lot of sources that we used here, as the research was mostly theoretical and mostly looking at the articles. So thank you very much for listening. And if there are some questions, I think we are looking forward to hear them and answer or to discuss.
So, thank you for listening. Thank you, Kristaps, for presenting of our research, our joint research. And maybe here is the field for discussion about new approaches. So this Kabada tool, yes, we can consider that Kabada tool is actually a new approach in entrepreneurship education, but maybe nowadays we see now also other solutions, other possible tools for education of students. It's an open question for discussion. Any ideas?
I have in my presentation.
So, yes, so, yes, Juris is ready to find out new approaches for business education.